welcome to Scott Pilgrim versus the podcast. And in this episode, we're taking down Scott Pilgrim versus the World, Volume 2 of the graphic novel series. I'm Alex.
We have a contentious relationship with this property. That's why the Versus is there. I'm Justin.
I'm Pete. We all like the property, so why are we trying to take something down?
But that's the name of the podcast. The Versus is in the title of the podcast, so we're versus this book. It's us, mano a buco, is the way that you say it, I think.
It's the same with Scott Pilgrim and the Evil Exes. He would be friends with them, except they must fight because of the Versus.
Mm-hmm. Every current boyfriend is somebody else's evil ex. Right?
When I sit down for dinner, I say it's Justin Tyler versus this food. And boy, do we go to town. But we love each other.
So yes, again, as we are making our way through the graphic novel series by Brian Lee O'Malley, working our way to the eventual Netflix series, the anime version of Scott Pilgrim, we're looking back on Volume 2, Scott Pilgrim versus the World. This was first published June 15th, 2005 by Oni Press. It was nominated for a 2006 Eisner Award, and it lost. Can you guys figure out, can you make a guess? Pete, I want to hear your guess because this is going to be particularly relevant to you. Who do you think, Brian Lee O'Malley, who we love this book, who do you think he lost to in 2006?
2006.
And I'll even give you the category he was in. He was in Best Writer, Artist, Humor is the category he lost for.
It wasn't Tim Seeley, was it?
No, you do love Tim Seeley, though. It's another person you love. Do you have a guess, Justin, before I say who it is?
I would say Daniel Warren Johnson, but that's too early, I believe.
Yeah, it's too
early.
early.
I'm going to go Paul Chadwick.
Ooh, that's good, but I don't think he'd be up for humor. It was actually he lost to Kyle Baker. Kyle Baker.
Kyle Baker. Oh, man.
Pete's friend, who he hangs out outside with at night during conventions.
And that's true. That's actually a thing that happened.
It's just a fact.
You wore his hat, right? Like, again, not a joke.
Yeah.
There you go.
We had some fun.
Yes, you did have some fun. He was nominated and won for The Bakers and Plastic Man, both of which are awesome. But that was a surprising fact to me, considering how popular this book was at the time.
Two winners.
Yes, he was also nominated for two 2006 Eagle Awards, mostly for the book, and nominated for a Wright Award as well for this book. But we're just getting started with this series here now. Picking up on the first volume, a little bit of recap of what goes on here. Spoilers, we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about everything. If you haven't read the book, turn away, go read the book.
Go read the book and then come back.
And then come back.
You don't just leave and read the book. Yeah, you got to come back.
Yeah, put it on pause. Make sure you come back to it later because we're going to have some notes. But in this book, Scott is now officially dating Ramona Flowers. Meanwhile, he still has to break up with Chau. He hasn't done that yet. Boy. So that's a big thrust of this particular book as Ramona kind of finds out about it as the relationship deepens and they find out more about each other. Knives definitely gets broken up with, fights Ramona by the end of the book. And meanwhile, Scott is continuing to truck his way through her evil exes. In this, issue, in this volume, he fights the second of her exes, who is Lucas Lee, a movie star. He leaves a little more change in an item than the previous ex did. And by the end, we find out who the third ex is. In addition, we flesh out a ton of the cast here. We meet some new characters. We find out more about some of the characters that we met in the first volume. So, listen, I still want to start very broad here because we're at the beginning of our journey through the series, not even halfway through. We had some impressions from revisiting the first volume for the first time in 20 years, maybe a little less for this one since it came out in 2005. But at the same time, almost 2 decades here down the road. What was your takeaway from checking out Scott Pilgrim versus the World the second time? Or third?
Well, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Are you guys reading the color editions or the black and white? I feel like we didn't mention this on the last episode, and I'm curious.
I'm reading the colored one.
Whoa, that's huge for you, Pete. I'm surprised.
Yeah.
You
Pete's
love
the
black and white
king.
I love the black and white, but the colored one was on sale or something. I don't know what happened, but I got it. And
if you went to a bakery and you're like, hey, give me a black and white cookie, and they were like, we only have these color cookies, but they're on sale, would you get those instead?
Hell yeah, if they're delicious and
Okay, you go into a diner, you're like, give me the black and white shake. And they're like, we only have this color shake, this strawberry
Also
shake.
known as strawberry. Yep.
yeah, I would say get away from me.
Interesting. Interesting. So shakes is where you draw the line that you don't draw with comic books.
Whoa.
He lives in a black and white world. There's no argument there.
I'm reading the black and white versions because those are the originals. I wanted to read the color version. I actually have, I think it's just the first two. They released them as
Yeah.
evil editions that
Yeah.
I think were just on sale at like San Diego Comic Con or New York Comic Con. And that has a bunch of ancillary material. And I keep meaning to check them out and I haven't yet. But are those the ones you're
What?
reading, Justin?
Yes, and they're great. The back matter is awesome, especially in this volume, which I guess we can talk about later on. But I really enjoyed revisiting this. And in general, let me say, I have forgotten so much of this backstory. I think the movie has sort of crushed the story down to what is
Yeah.
in the feature. So I've lost all this original comic book knowledge. And man, it is good.
It's definitely, we should mention, it's kind of dated. Some of the sayings that they use
Yes.
were okay for the time, but now definitely do not hold up.
I think specifically, and this is what I was getting at in the last volume as well, which comes up here, he keeps using the R word, which I feel
Yes.
like you probably should not use anymore.
That's not probably, you shouldn't use that anymore.
You shouldn't use that. And, that was never anything I was really saying a lot, but it's definitely growing up in upstate New York. That was a very popular word to say.
Yeah.
Yes, of the time, I think kids saying that or 20-year-olds saying that, it makes sense. Now, 20 years later, that's just something you should probably cut out. There's also a lot of discussion of Knives calling Ramona fat in this volume, which,
Yeah.
again, I think I get it from the perspective of she's 17 years old and Ramona's a little bit older, and this is kind of how this stuff works anyway. It feels very natural. But at the same time, I don't know that it necessarily holds up in this day and age. It's not something that I think necessarily would have made it through the editing process if it was published now, right?
Now, for sure. But I will say, from the perspective we talked about last episode a lot, where these characters are imperfect, they're kids, they make mistakes. You can see that, and it even though it's not, the time has aged it even more poorly. Even back then, it was sort of like, well, don't do that for on both of those fronts. But I think the point is, and I think this holds up from a character perspective, like they are being wrong here, and you see, especially with Scott, a little bit of a shift where he's starting to have some proto maturity coming in at the same time he's being sort of a goober.
Yeah, this was the big thing that I was struck by in this volume, and I don't mean this poorly because I like this book a lot, but you could feel some of the growing pains coming through here with the characters as Brian Lee O'Malley is maturing in his style as well. Not to jump ahead to the third volume, but that is, I think most people consider the high watermark of the series. That's the one where it really, really came into its own before he was trying to start figuring out the end game of how the series would go. But from the nonstop innovation of the first volume to the maturity of the third volume, you got this one in the middle that feels like it's important for the arc, it's important for where the characters go, but there's a little bit of figuring out how to balance those two tones, how to dig in more emotionally, while at the same time still have Scott excited about a mithril skateboard and things like that, or big fights or jokes that are happening, or just weird fights in the middle of a library, things like that. So I don't know that it's quite as successful as the first volume for me, but there's still so much that I really loved about it.
Yeah, I mean, the Lucas Lee fight is worth it alone. I mean, that's hysterical. I mean, I had forgotten about the part where he asked for the autograph. Like, that was just such a
He
fun
takes a little
moment.
break.
I got to ask you, not to keep turning it to you, Pete, but you are a huge Luke Wilson fan, and one of the ongoing jokes in this volume is mistaking Lucas Lee for Luke Wilson, and then later on there's another character that he mistakes is actually named Luke Wilson, I
Luke
think,
Wilson,
but not
yeah.
Luke Wilson, the
An
actor.
unrelated Luke Wilson.
Yeah,
How'd
no
you feel
relation.
about that, Pete?
Well, I thought it's a fun bit. I thought for sure it was just a really fun bit. It also makes me really love the movie fight. I think Chris Evans as the Lucas Lee was such an amazing, fun choice. But I also really love the Lucas Lee in this comic as well. This whole like Oscar thing was hysterical. Yeah, just
It's a little more
really,
intimidating here.
yeah, yeah. But the chin beard kind of like beard look was just it's a perfect kind of thing that I think they did a great job on.
Pete, this is maybe a foolish question, but what are your Wilson brothers power rankings?
Oh wow. Yeah.
Because there's Luke, there's Owen, and then there's the third one.
Right.
Yeah, the third one was unbelievable in that God, I loved him in it was that roller derby movie with a bunch of amazing actors, and I thought he was hysterical in that.
Okay, quit dodging the question and give us the rankings.
Well, that's the thing. I'm kind of stalling because the real answer is the unheard of Luke first, then
the unheard of Wilson.
Yeah, the unheard of Wilson, then Luke, then Owen.
Wow. You got the unheard, the unnamed.
Really? Where would you rank the one from this volume, the one that doesn't exist in real life, in that list as well?
Yeah, he would be fourth. He would be fourth.
Oh, interesting. I thought since he was the most vague and unseen, maybe they would make him first.
So first the Wilson who was in the roller derby movie we don't remember the name of, then Luke Wilson.
Future Man from Bottle Rocket.
Right. Then Luke Wilson, then Owen Wilson, then Luke Wilson again, but the other Luke Wilson.
Exactly.
Don't mix them up.
Okay.
Because I want to say, like, this comic that we're talking about references Bottle Rocket.
Oh, yeah.
The first Wes Anderson movie starring Luke and Owen Wilson. And reading it here, isn't it nice when the things that we like are in the things that we like? You know what I mean? Like when the characters in something we like the same things that we like. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I totally.
I just wanted to say on the Wes Anderson at all, do you think that influenced this book? Like there's a lot of, in this volume in particular, like a lot of landscapes, a lot of centering of characters. He plays with camera angles in a different way. We have that very fun recurring bit of establishing shots of actual places in Canada where he gives the hours that they're open and closed, which I love that bit. Yeah. But it all feels very Wes Anderson to me in a certain way.
Well, I think the Bottle Rocket reference is deliberate because I think tonally it's very similar in that the comedy in Bottle Rocket, one of the funniest Wes Anderson movies, even though it was way back in his first feature-length movie, is so like dry in the same way that Scott is, I think, especially in this volume, and very much like, in Bottle Rocket, they're robbing this cold storage facility, and it's one of the funny sequences, and it's very Scott Pilgrim to me.
Agreed.
What were you going to say, Pete? Before I
don't know. You ruined the moment. I think it's one of those things. I'm just messing with you. I also just like what Justin was saying about somebody liking the things that you like. Scott Pilgrim's rant about like getting a job so he could get free burritos. I felt very seen in that. I thought that was a real a fun moment of like
I love that story.
Being completely over. Like this has no relevance, and he's like, no, you don't understand. The burritos it was a Tex-Mex, but I just thought that was so funny.
Well, I love the emotional layers that we get in this book through conversations between Ramona and Scott. It feels so true to the real beginning of a relationship where that's what you're doing. You're talking through all these previous ridiculous stories. You're not specifically addressing the heartache in a deep way that maybe will come later, but the way that Scott gets at it, and we start to wipe away those layers of pain that he's been feeling since his breakup with Envy Adams is what we find out by the end of the book is great. It makes you really feel for him, I think, in a way that you don't necessarily feel for him in the first volume. You enjoy him as a character in the first volume, but here you start to understand him and start to understand why he is such a goober, to use the term that you were using, Justin.
Well, and also like to the overlapping of all these relationships at once is so like the time in your life when you're in your early 20s and you're like, oh, I'm really attracted to this person, but I just broke up with this person and I'm sad, but I'm currently dating this person. It's very like all these trains run in parallel and perpendicular to each other. It's the book captures that feeling so well. I think that's why it keys into people when they first read it, especially if you read it at that age or right after. So, and rereading it, I'm like, it takes you back to when you're at that age. You're like, I love this person, but I really need to break up with the person that I loved yesterday, but now I want to break up with immediately.
Yeah, well, I think it also like the not so important conversations, but are so important conversations, like when they're at the show and all of a sudden it just kind of cuts away from action to hear these two people just kind of talking about the show, and then later two people who are like, oh my god, that girl smokes, oh that is so cool, you know, like it's just so random but yet says a lot. I really love those slice of moments stuff that you get in this comic. It's such a great idea for giving you the headspace of the characters and what's going on and other people in the same venue, which is unique. You don't get that a lot. It's usually just, what are the main characters doing? Where are the main characters in this setting? You know, other people around the main characters. So just like the kind of random or slice of life that you get that sets this tone that kind of really encapsulates everything that this comic is about is such a cool, great thing that I think is just so smart.
Well, on top of that, I feel like the main character syndrome that Scott has, and it works for him because he actually is the main character. But I feel like that is all inherent to all of us when we're young like that, where we're like, yeah, those people are talking about what I'm dealing with because what I'm dealing with is so important. It's going to shut down this whole club until we get this resolved. And that's also just a great capture of youth. But I do want to say we should really talk about the main character of this book. Kim Pines. The real title of this book, Kim Pines versus the World.
I thought you were going to say Young Neil for a second because he's my.
Oh wow!
I love him.
He's your favorite?
I love
Young Neil.
Now,
He looks exactly.
He's already dating
Get
Knives.
out of here!
Come on,
He's a betrayer.
He's just a nice,
what are you
supportive
talking about?
guy. He's Scott with none of the problems.
What?
Wow. What?
He is. He looks exactly like a smaller Scott. But he's not problematic. He's just a nice guy. Knives is using him in this book. We could dive into that a little bit, but it's okay. He's having a nice time and he's trying to be supportive of her and loving.
I can't believe you. Justin brought up a very valid thing that I wanted to talk about, and then you just throw a grenade down the hall to be like, "Oh yeah, have fun talking about whatever you wanted to."
No, it's fine. We can
Our
talk
Young
about...
Neil versus the World podcast is much shorter.
Now, who did you want to talk about? Kim Prine was the name of the character.
Oh, come on,
Yeah.
man.
John
I'm
Pine.
so happy to get more Kim info. It's, you know,
Kim
it's
Prine.
something. Oh, nice. It's something that the movie doesn't address at all. And I think the backstory of, you know, Scott, who, you know, kind of being in his own world and maybe being a dick and not being respectful of other people, kind of quickly fell in love with and then quickly fell out of love with Kim. And she just has to kind of like roll with it, you know? So I really loved what they did and said, and I wanted so much more in this issue of Kim and her feelings.
Well, I'm curious, leading up to the new TV animated series, are we going to get more Kim? Is the future of Scott Pilgrim outside of the end of this series a relationship with Kim Pines?
Outside, like going forward at the end, that's a crazy thing. That's a grenade.
That's what I think is going to happen in the animated show. I think the animated show.
Okay, you're jumping too far. You're getting too far ahead of your skis here.
Getting hot takes on hot takes now.
This backstory that we're talking about, this great sequence where Kim flashes back to her relationship, meeting Scott, what that was like. We see a big fight sequence, all the stuff that we didn't get in the movie, and maybe I do think we'll get in the animated series.
Yeah.
Because it is really cinematic. It's very much leading into like, I don't know what the comp is. It's not exactly a Western per se because it's very video game infused. Maybe there's a little bit of like Miyazaki with the wind blowing and the leaves and everything there. whatever it is, it's very cool and it comes in the middle. It does also point to, I'm trying to be careful here with my language because I don't want to upset Pete, because again, I like this stuff. But one of the faults with the book is it blows out the cast so much that there are certain times when it's like, it's swerving focus all over the place to set up these characters for later that we like and the sequences we like. But it does lead to this very fractured feel where there were points, even though I've read through this whole series, watched the movie, etc., where I was having a little bit of a hard time keeping track of like, wait, who are we with right now? Which of the many women in this book that all have brown hair are we following necessarily? But
you're like, how does this character relate to young Neil, the only character that Alex Zalben,
you should
care
see
about?
my murder board. It is wild. Young Neil in the middle, and everything comes out of that.
Yeah, no piece of yarn connects to him, but he is in the middle of the book.
Yeah, it's like he's a little fly caught in the spider's web that is this book.
Yeah.
Kim's stuff is great. What do we feel? I want to ask this right now because I know Pete has some strong feelings here. Just based on having read the first 2 volumes here, Team Ramona or Team Knives? Pete, take it away.
Well, you're trying to set me up here, but I just think it's one of those things where it's interesting when I'm reading, kind of going back to revisit it, because there is a Ramona part in here that I was struggling with because I'm hard Team Knives, but the walk and talk that she does with Scott Pilgrim in this, where they're kind of getting to the bottom of stuff, and she casually Ramona's just like, oh my God, that's your answer? I want to break up with you. And then they kind of change subjects and it's never kind of brought up again. I was like, oh, I don't like that. I don't like how casually she's treating this relationship. And you can tell that Knives takes it very seriously, because you get an amazing attack in the mall, which is hysterical. I love the bit of Ramona just like grabbing things and then just like having super strength and be able to rip stuff out of the ground. I love that. I think that's such a fun. Yeah.
Pete, you're a huge rom-com fan. The fact that your Team Knives is mind-boggling. It's like watching Sleeps in Seattle and being like, I love Bill Pullman. He's the one that she's supposed to end up with.
He's a great actor. He does great work. You should love Bill Pullman.
I'm not saying the actor. I'm saying the character of the man with bad allergies that Meg Ryan is desperately trying to get out of the relationship with so she can go be with Tom Hanks. And here you are being a Pullmaniac.
Here's the thing. I'm going to kind of back up Pete a little bit, at least based on this volume. And here, the reason is that you feel more for Knives over the course of this book because she's being so mistreated by Scott versus Ramona. We get, I think it is Kim calls out, or maybe it's Stacy Pilgrim, Scott's sister, is like, actually, maybe you guys are good for each other because you're both kind of like callous and mean and sort of focused on yourselves. Narcissistic. That's a simpler way of saying that. But we still, 2 volumes in, we don't know much about Ramona. We don't get her head. Like Pete was saying, she defers everything. And that's stuff that we will pick up later. But right now, this relationship is all about Scott, and it's all about everything that Scott is putting in there. And he is the title character, but it still leans into that Mannix Pixie dream girl trope because we don't get anything about her yet other than her relationship with Scott and a little bit from what we hear on the other characters. So in terms of a romantic thing, like, I don't think Knives should be with Scott because he's awful, but in terms of feeling for a character, I'm definitely more Team Knives than Team Ramona as of this volume.
Leading into your Knives Neil ship that you're trying to push on us here.
I hope the books lean into that. Do they? I'm not sure, but I assume so.
Young Niall
by Scott Pilgrim versus the great relationship that young Neil and Knives Chau have. Volume 5.
The thing is, like, I take your point. Like, Knives is going through all the emotions, and I think this book actually does a great job of just very artistically showing what it feels like to be like, to declare love for someone and be immediately cut off from it by the breakup. Like, and over the course of the book, when she dyes her hair, we actually get a lot of time with her, and it's great. She has the bigger emotional moments. But the Ramona stuff is purposefully being withheld here because we have to build it up over the course of these volumes. And secondarily, they're in the phase where it is all light and fun and walking and talking about everything and anything in the world. So it makes sense that it's not really heavy with emotion. It's all the poppy stuff. But I would argue the real relationship here is Kim Pines
I agree.
to Scott. And like the book is putting all the emotion on that. We feel her pain. She's much more present with Scott. The way she talks to Ramona and confesses that she dated Scott in high school, I was like, what? That's such an exposure to do that. And if this were a rom-com, and it technically is a more traditional rom-com, it'd be building toward a Kim Scott relationship, I feel like.
I love that we have all read these books several times, watched the movie several times, and we're still like, ooh, I got these ships. I hope they really pan out.
I'm really pulling for it.
We'll see. I don't
All in
know.
our corners, dialing up the fan base.
Yeah, it's the three big teams of the book. We got Pete shipping Knives and Scott. We got Justin shipping Kim and Scott. We got me over here with young Neil doing whatever I'm doing.
Knives.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Young Neil to be happy.
It's a bunch of nonsense. There you go. What else in this volume jumped out at you? What other scenes or threads would you like to call out?
Yeah, I really love the Envy phone call and like the ramifications of that, of like I love the back and forth of like, it really felt like someone was in a relationship, because like you just see the three dots and Scott being like, what? Like, that's somebody who knows somebody well enough when they're not talking to be like, what is going on? You know, because otherwise, you know, you might just be like, all right, you know, they don't have anything to say. But the kind of history that's shown there in those little moments, I think is so great and powerful. And then how it just wrecks Scott to have to talk to his ex, and he's just laying there on the floor when his roommate gets home. Is such a, I just think, you know, Brian Lee O'Malley has been through some shit. He has enough life experience and had his heart broken and been through some stuff to be able to kind of showcase this in a way that is clear that somebody is not reading about it. They've experienced it. They know what's up.
100%. And you see Envy being like badass, beautiful. Everyone loves her. Yeah. Except for Scott, because she broke his heart. Like, I think that's so good. The shots of Clash at Demon Head are so good. Clash at Demon Head named after famously named after a Nintendo game. She's so shitty about Sex Bob-omb, but her band is also named after like a NES thing. Like, I love that. Just all the little knives, lowercase k, being twisted here all at once. So that is all great. I want to shout out the recipe. I thought was really great.
Oh yeah, that's fun.
When I was talking about how like Scott has some proto maturity happening here when Ramona's over at his garbage apartment, and he's like, I cook, and she's so impressed, and that's such a I'm a little grown up here, even though he loves garlic bread. And then we get a recipe, which is such an old school comic book thing to do, indie comic thing to do, and it was great, especially because this recipe is happening during this huge emotional moment that we set up in the first half of the first third of the book, with Kim meeting Ramona. She's clearly upset. We've been following Kim into this situation, and we have a recipe and Kim being like, I used to date Scott. Like, I love the way that all just packages together.
Yeah.
I also really liked, you know, their kind of attention to detail with their friends, which is awesome. Like, you got a haircut? Kim's wearing high heels. You know what I mean? Like these little things that other people might not notice, but because you spend so much time with them, it's, you know, you do notice it is a big deal. So I just, the attention to detail on this kind of stuff really jumps out, especially the second, third time reading it. It's just, it just really clicks. Really clicks.
You're famously haircut blind, Pete, right? You can't see haircut.
Yeah, I think a lot of men are. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The couple of things that I wanted to call out in that scene where they're having dinner, we get what I would say are probably the two biggest takeaway lines from Scott Pilgrim. Bread makes you fat. The other one is I'm in lesbians with you, which people say both of those way too much. I think them way too much and then censor myself and don't say them because I'm cool.
It's interesting how much of this book is in your brain. Last episode, you talked about how you and your wife are, my hair looks like this.
Yeah.
And that's funny.
This book but the bread makes you fat every time with garlic bread. Bread makes you fat? It's
I
great.
love garlic bread.
I do also love garlic bread.
Garlic bread is
So
awesome.
there's that. This is maybe a little bit of a bigger takeaway thing, but I like the different gradations. We were sort of touching on this just a little bit before, but the different gradations in terms of how the friend group treats each other. We talked about in the first volume that they straight up hate Scott. Like they just think he's the absolute worst. But at the same time, they know what envy did to Scott and hurt him was even worse than that. So to see them switch to be on his side and be like, oh my God, she called you. What was she doing? That's terrible. That also feels very true to a friend group because there are friends that you're like, God damn it, I hate that guy. Why does he always hang out with us? But also, you would defend him with your life at the same time.
Well, it goes to, maybe it's just me, but most of my relationships are built around like, I love these people so much and I express it by roasting them and by like calling out things. That's how I grew up and that's how I definitely behave. Have you guys ever experienced this?
Not yet.
So I feel like that is also very, like, that really resonates with me.
Yeah.
I also oh God, the roommate fun with Kim was really great, but also like the moment of like Scott talking to his sister and then being like, "You hung out with Ramona," and she's like, "I don't know," and she, and it was just like I feel like such a cool small moment that I think was again it just really feels like someone who knows and is kind of been there and it just like understands siblings and also like when one person's freaking out. So I just feel like there's just so much little stuff going on that's so enjoyable.
I also really like Wallace being his trainer. That's a great position for Wallace, but also not being very good at it at the same time, or not
500
caring
push-ups
enough.
is a lot.
Yeah, but also he just like doesn't care quite enough to do the best job possible. I love Scott getting into the fight with Lucas and then immediately just straight up getting cartoon destroyed to the point where like, hold on, stop. Do you want some carrot sticks? Do you want to like just chill out for a second and chat? That's very fun. Also, the way that he beats Lucas by tricking him into doing a dangerous skateboarding move.
Yeah,
very fun turnout there.
Great.
There was one thing I wanted to throw out to you. Last episode, we were talking about whether there was somebody better to cast than Michael Cera as Scott Pilgrim in the movie. This volume, it was present in the first volume as well, but in this volume, there's a lot of like Scott being a sweet kind of dumb guy and then immediately flying into fits of rage. So I present to you, maybe a good pick for Scott Pilgrim would have been in his prime Adam Sandler. What do you guys think?
Oh, wow.
Right?
Wow.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I don't know. For some reason, he doesn't have the same wide-eyed goofball nature that Scott has here, but I could see a little. He can pull off the sort of bigger acting moments as we've seen in some of his movies.
Yeah. Bring that uncut gems. He could do it now. He could do Billy Madison, but for Scott Pilgrim redo.
I can't tell if you're baiting us or trying to make me happy.
Honestly can't tell either at this point. That's how I was raised.
I thought we were going to
each other until it all shuts down.
That's great. I thought we were going to talk about maybe the different casting for Lucas. What do you think?
Other than Chris Evans?
Yeah.
Chris Evans, this is arguably his greatest role of all time. What are you talking about?
I don't know about that, but he is perfect. And it was a perfect timing as well for getting Chris Evans before he was in his Captain America days. He was the douche from so many comedy movies. Absolutely great. So did you have another suggestion, Justin?
Yeah, Justin, what are you saying by bringing this up?
I was saying before that Chris Evans is sort of very friendly and nice, and this Lucas Lee in the comic is a little bit more aggressive, big, scarier. What about Jason Momoa?
or John Cena.
Yeah.
Or to throw it out there, if you want somebody that brings like a little bit of that danger to the role, maybe like a baby Hitler. Like you go back in time, grab
stop.
baby Hitler, bring him forward.
Stop. Why would you do this?
I'm just
You
saying,
can't
give him
do
a
this for every
chance.
episode.
Give him a chance.
Don't do this every episode, man. You don't have to
Astute
call stuff
listeners
back.
may be able to spot the baby Hitler reference in all of our episodes. Scott Pilgrim versus the podcast.
That's not fun.
A couple other things I want to say. In the beginning, Scott's dad looks just like an older Stephen Stills. Secretly, maybe they're brothers. Just something to think about. Love the reference to comics aren't just for kids anymore. Bam Pow comics aren't just for kids on the Now magazine, which if you don't know is like a very cliched article and headline that went around for literally years, around the time when we first started doing Comic Book Club and comics really entered the mainstream. And then finally, shouts and RIP to Gord Downey, frontman of Tragically Hip, that they reference here at band rehearsal. Great band. He died long after this book was published. I've seen Tragically Hip a ton of times. Really great. Love the shout out there. Again, I like when characters I like the same things that I like.
Yeah, notice that. I loved every time Scott hit the pause button. That was just such a fun kind of visual thing that they did.
What was that?
They just wrote like pause up there when he was like,
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, great book. Really good still. Good series. I guess we'll keep covering it, even though we started very aggressively at the beginning of the episode. Very anti this book, but I think we've won each other over by the end here. So the book wins this round is, I guess.
Okay, I see what you're saying. All right.
We lose again? We're 0-2.
We lost again. Man, this is rough.
0-2.
If you like
I haven't gone undefeated since JV soccer I haven't gone fully defeated since JV soccer when we went 0-18.
Yeah, it's a big difference in story there.
Yeah. If you'd like to support this podcast and all the podcasts we do, patreon.com/Comic Book Club. Also, we do a live show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to Facebook and YouTube. Come hang out. We would love to chat with you about Scott Pilgrim. Android, Apple, Spotify, or the app of your choice to subscribe, listen, and follow the show at Comic Book Live on Twitter, Comic Book Club Live on TikTok and Instagram, comicbookclublive.com for this podcast and many more. Next time, we'll be taking on Scott Pilgrim, Volume 3. Let's see.
Oh, yeah, come on.
We're taking that one for sure, I can guarantee it. What if Adam Sandler played all the roles?
Nutty Professor style, the club says.
The club.